Ladies and gentlemen, may we request you to please take your seats in the auditorium as we shall begin the interactive dialogue shortly.
Nggak, tapi cek karena jadi
Commence the day's proceedings, ladies and gentlemen. May we please rise for the national anthem.
Sri Lanka Mawatha, Sri Lanka, Namo 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 Mawatha. Sundara Sri Parini, Surani Ati Sobamana Ramuha, Kanya Kanaya Nikamal Valaturu Piri Jaya Turiya Ramya. Apahata Sata Siri Sata Sadhana, Jivana Mata. Nilikandu Mena
A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Kasuni Balachandra Adhikari, and I shall be your MC this evening. On behalf of the Thought Leadership Forum, it is my distinct pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. The Thought Leadership Forum, ladies and gentlemen, is an independent, apolitical awareness enhancement initiative founded by Chartered Accountant Ranel Wijesinha as far back as a decade and a half ago. The forum has consistently engaged in policy dialogue through print and electronic media and through public fora such as this, devoid of political bias and private vested interest. Today's session, ladies and gentlemen, will address issues arising from the reform intentions, strategies, structures, processes, and the legislation under the Electricity Reform Act of 2002, the Electricity Act of 2009, which superseded the Act of 2002, and the current issues and intentions, the reform rationale, and draft legislation of 2023. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we are revisiting reforms after the first legally enabled initiative 22 years ago. Well, prior to moving on to the interactive dialogue, we'd like to convey a few housekeeping rules kindly. In order to ensure that we focus on the discussion with zero distractions, we kindly ask you to switch off your mobile devices. And also, ladies and gentlemen, the Thought Leadership Forum provides an equal opportunity to every voice, and thus question cards such as this have been distributed so that you can jot down your question from the very commencement of this session. Accordingly, the Thought Leadership Forum regrets that we will be restrained in entertaining oral questions off the floor. Nevertheless, Ranel Wijesinha, who will perform the role of our discussion catalyst, will endeavor to accommodate every possible question. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming on stage our resource persons this evening. We begin with Engineer Dr. Tilak Siembalampitiya. Engineer Dr. Tilak Siembalampitiya is a well-known figure in the power and energy sector and has been actively involved in research, consultancy, and policy advocacy roles in various capacities for international agencies and governments. He's also engaged in academia as a lecturer in leading universities in the country. Next, Engineer Lakshita Veerasinghe. Engineer Lakshita Veerasinghe is a senior electrical engineer with over 25 years of experience in generation, system control operations, transmission and generation planning, and has been engaged in policy formulation relating to the power and energy sector. And Engineer Buddhika Vijayawardena. Engineer Buddhika Vijayawardena is an electrical engineer with over 15 years of experience in electricity distribution and transmission projects and has been engaged in addressing safeguards for the electricity consumer and employee rights. He is an active member of the CEB Engineers Union and is presently the Joint Secretary of CEB EU. And now your host and discussion catalysts for the evening. Past President, CA Sri Lanka, former Chairman, Monitoring and Advisory Committee, Power Sector Reforms under the Electricity Reform Act 2002, former Chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka, Ranel Wijesinha. Over to you, Mr. Wijesinha.
Right. Very good afternoon to all of you. Let's begin the interactive dialogue because as we conveyed We are not having any presentations. There are no lengthy reading of profiles. We get directly to the interactive dialogue. In order to begin, I thought it must be said that Kasuni conveyed to all of you that the Thought Leadership Forum is an independent apolitical awareness enhancement initiative. I thought I must convey, particularly in this forum, in the CA Sri Lanka Auditorium, that it all began in 2005, prior to the presidential election, when some of us felt that it is important to have an independent, objective assessment of the way forward for a nation. There was at that time a revisitation of the merits of an open economy. And if we go back in time, we all know that it is in 77 that Sri Lanka opened the economy and began an outward-looking strategy for economic development as opposed to an insular, inward-looking approach. And that led to more than a decade and a half of activity. But when it came to 1994, many of you will recall that while we had opened the economy and the reforms we're talking about today, much of the state-owned enterprise reforms, privatizations, listing of state-owned enterprise reforms, partial listings and new listings, all began between 89 to 93. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are not a new kid on the block, as some people might think all over the world. Sri Lanka was at one stage poised to be the leader of Asia, South Asia. Although in many respects today, with no disrespect to our own nation, we might be the laggard in certain respects. Then came 1994, and I say this for a purpose. In 1994, President Kumaratunga, or rather Mrs. Chandrika Bandara Kumaratunga, went on political platforms saying the market economy is bad, the open economy is bad, it's an open wound, and that we should cancel all privatizations. If you recall, there was the commercialization of public enterprise division, which functioned very effectively between 89 to 93. Today's Cinnamon Grands, Cinnamon Lakes were all owned by government. United Motors was a government-owned business undertaking. The National Development Bank was a state-owned enterprise, and I've dealt with them extensively. A large number of companies got listed on the stock exchange, and that was as far back as 93. So then, in 94, while there was this anti-open economy feeling, we all know that Air Lanka was very well part privatized, and Sri Lanka Telecom became a listed entity. Then came 2005, and a manifesto of a candidate, presidential candidate, spoke about, again, closing the economy as it were, cancelling the privatizations, not proceeding with privatizations. So when this manifesto was out, many chartered accountants called me, and I scheduled what I termed the open economy and privatization myths, realities, risks, and safeguards. Regrettably, and many people who are here who have been members during my time know that there was political interference, not by politicians, but by professionals who sought the intervention of government, because our Institute of Chartered Accountants is under the Ministry of Commerce, or at that time Ministry of Trade or whatever. And the seminar that I had scheduled with C.P. De Silva, former chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, former Spence chairman, and Ranjit Fernando, former general manager of the NDB, who later became the CEO of NDB PLC. That seminar was cancelled. So within 48 hours, I set up the Thought Leadership Forum. And in the year 2008, I incorporated it. So it's Thought Leadership Forum, Private Limited. With that, let me begin the discussion. Reform has a purpose. Reform has outcome. Reform has to be desirable. We are not simply doing reform in any sector of any kind, whether it's electricity or any other. without a purpose. But at the same time, I think it is important for us to understand that if you want to do reform or any restructuring of any kind, there has to be a consultation with every single stakeholder from within and outside. So I have to begin with a question to Buddhika. Buddhika, my question to you is, the Sri Lankan Electricity Board is perceived to be overstaffed, over-remunerated. There was a lot of anonymous letters going about engineer salaries, inefficient, lethargic, as well as a home for irregular practices, and thus the mantra today is that because the CEB is what is perceived to be, we need to restructure and reform it. My question to Buddhika is this statement or this perception fair, unfair, reasonable, or unreasonable? I want a very quick response. Yes, you can be heard. Go ahead. These are quick fire questions. I want quick fire answers. Okay, go ahead.
I think I'm audible, right? I can confidently say that perception is clearly unfair and untrue. And I think I can back up with my facts.
Yes,
Yeah.
quick answer. Good. Tilak, the question, a follow-up question as extension to that is that if indeed, as I said earlier, the CEB is perceived to be a home for, let me be very bold, the perception is corrupt practices. Do you think that on the basis that if there is a acceptance of a facilitation payment, for every giver, for every taker, there is a giver. So if indeed there is irregular practice within the CEB, would it be fair or unfair to say that a private party, local or foreign, may have to be on the giving side? So the private sector also then is culpable. Your quick answer.
Certainly, yes. Of course, there has to be a taker and a giver. But if I may extend my answer by a couple of sentences, most of the problems that I see in the sector are not exactly related to giving and taking. They are related to inaction on policy. Later I can elaborate, which finally makes electricity more expensive than it should have been.
Right. Lakshita, Engineer Lakshita, my question to you is, the electricity tariff is the subject of extensive discussion today, extensive critique, and there are doubts in the minds of many people. But given that the tariff is what we consume, whether as individuals in households, whether in rural parts of the city, whether in industries, whether in manufacturing or services, my question, and again I want a brief answer, do you believe the tariff as constructed today is, in your view, fair or unfair?
I should say unfair.
Unfair. Okay. Now, we are at a fairly interesting point here, because some of you may have even read the papers today, where no less than the Union of the Public Utilities Commission alleges that the electricity tariff can come down by 25%. Now, this might not be what the Office of the President, the Cabinet, the Minister might like to hear. So the purpose of this thought leadership forum is to surface issues very independently, devoid of political bias. We are not going to be prejudiced in favor of government, like many even professionals. They would say, look, Ranel, why don't we go along with this? Why don't we get this reform behind you? That has never been my raison d'etre. That's not my ikigai or my purpose in life. So if indeed this is the case, I think the very next question I would pose is about how we move on from here. And I think, Buddhika, I will provide you with an opportunity to justify why you reject the statement that the CEB is inefficient and so on. But Buddhika, round two with you. And I hope those in the control tower are ready to present slides. Buddhika, give me an evidence-based justification for your rejection of the perception of the CEB that I described earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ajit. Now, I need slide number 15.
Slide number 15, please, quickly. Right.
Okay.
All of you can see.
Now, let me compare from 2004 to 2022 because I have data from a CB website. From 2004 to 2022, in these 18 years, GDP of Sri Lanka tripled from 24 US dollars billion to 74 billion USD. And we all know that GDP is positively correlated with consumption of electricity. So with this development of the country, CB had to expand its power system. And I can give you some numbers. For example, the installed capacity, let me give the percentage increase. The installed capacity was increased by 63%. Generation was increased by 98%. Then the sales were increased by 118% because we could reduce the system losses from 17% to 8.8%. Now, number of power stations increased. Total number of substations increased by 122%. Low voltage line length was increased by 96%. And at the same time, per person power consumption or per capita power consumption was increased by 88%. Now, to cater this, CB had to expand obviously. The number of consumers was increased by 117% from 3.2 million to 6.9 million. But then CB had to expand the operation and number of employees by 60%. Now, if I give some indices on the right side of the slide, consumers per employee. Now, the average employee served in 2004, 238 consumers. This was increased by 35%. So we have become efficient, not inefficient. Number of substation per employee, it was increased by 39%. Sales per employee, it was increased by 36%. So I can, with facts, reject the idea that CAB is overstaffed. And next, I like to go to.
So let me pause there for a minute.
Okay.
Buddhika is rejecting the statement that the CEB is inefficient, lethargic, bureaucratic, and basically has been sitting there doing nothing, leading up to an accumulation of debts and costs and consequently what we consume. He's rejecting that. Can we have that slide back again, please? Please keep the slide till we tell you that we go to the next one. Okay, so fundamentally, Buddhika, we will not take too much time on this. You're saying that the generation capacity has increased by how many gigawatt?
By
that slide is not here. Where is
it
that
was like 2,500 megawatts to 4,000 megawatts.
Right. So that's a significant increase, right? And essentially what he's saying is, if indeed it is overstaffed and the statistics we use is per employee, what is the capacity? Per employee, how much of electricity have been sold in terms of not rupees, but gigawatts? How many substations? And so on and so forth. So can I then ask you the next question? I, for one, I was out for about 10 years, but when I returned, I had done some power sector experience overseas. One of the first things I asked is, what is the systems loss in this country? Tilak, Lakshita, I don't know, you can jog by memory, but in the early 90s, I'm sure it would have been the neighborhood of 28% or 25% or thereabouts. Tilak? This is generation, transmission, distribution. The collective loss was as high as that. Now, why is this important? In various parts of the world, there is an independent regulator, the equivalent of our PUCSL. Now, for example, in the state of Florida, I found that using factor costs and other numbers, the regulator ensures that your system's losses don't exceed 7.8 or 8%. Okay? So I was horrified that ours was 3 to 4 times that. But if indeed the CEB is inefficient, those losses perhaps would have continued. Can we have the slide that shows how the transmission losses have come down? This slide is not the clearest, but show me the numbers from 15s to 20s, how it dropped to 8s. Is there a matrix that you have? I think you have. Because the audience cannot see this too well.
I'm
But
sorry,
anyway,
I don't
let's-
have the matrix, but I. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I can elaborate what.
No,
yeah.
let's be brief because I want to go on to the next question because we have limited time. Can you just tell me the numbers? What is the year you're using, 2004? What was the system's loss?
It was 17.1% in 2000.
Control room, don't take the slides away until we tell you. How much was it?
It was 17.1%.
17.1%. What is it today?
Today it's about 8.8%.
Let me ask you, what are the regional statistics? Have you got a slide on that?
No, we don't have a retail.
Tilak, yes, please.
Most states in India are still struggling to come below 25%. But having said that, Delhi is very good. Bombay is very good. The metropolitan area, as good as Sri Lanka.
Is that right?
Bangladesh is good. Bangladesh is around 10%.
Yes.
And we are at 8.8.
Yes.
So Bangladesh, although the culture, or you may think that it's just like India, no,
Right.
they have been able to manage it very well at 10%.
So regionally, Tilak, just to pause there, we as Sri Lanka today don't fare as badly as we are perceived to be, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So some credit to the CEB. Because
Yes,
they
I would say, the electricity meter is perhaps the most sacred piece of legal instrument in a house.
Right.
As I always say, you can steal anything and get away in Sri Lanka, but not electricity.
Right. Now there again, the exposure I've had to various countries on this, these losses, they will tell you as engineers, one part of this loss can be considered technical, one non-technical. Non-technical is where there is power pirating. If you are in the water sector, there is water leakages or stealing. So even that to a large extent, Buddhika, can I ask you this pointed question? Not the CEB, but the culture of our people. The power pirating or the leakages have substantially come down, isn't it? Yes or no?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So you can't blame people pirating power on any inefficiency if there was one of the CEB. So given that, Buddhika, thank you very much for that. Lakshita, if tariff, which you earlier said is not fair, if tariff is driven by cost, and frequently we use the word cost reflective. Now here, I don't know whether there is anyone from the chambers, but there was a time not too long ago when the then United National Party government, Lakshita and Buddhika, driven by sometimes the chambers, said CB is making losses, increase the prices. It's very easy to stay in Colombo, get transported by drivers in luxurious cars and say up the tariff. And that's what they did, right? The IMF had a country director called Nadim Ulaq. The United National Party had in 2002 or 3 a deregulation workshop, and I'll name names. A fellow member of our institute, Chandra Jayaratna, called me and said, Ranel, can you take a session and moderate the session in Maravilla, funded by the Asian Development Bank, And there it was in Maravilla 2-day workshop. And one of those workshops, I moderated the tea sector. The electricity sector was moderated by someone else. And Nadimul Haq in the audience, the country director of IMF, got up and said, let's increase the tariff. And lots of people agreed with him. Being an accountant, I know the CEB has, like any institution, debt and equity. If you have too much debt and less equity, the probability is your interest cost is there. If you have mismanaged your company and you have to borrow a lot of money, and that's something that the CEB is conscious of. If the government, through policy, wants electricity subsidized, you produce, government subsidizes. But was the government at any stage in the history of the CEB, has the government or the General Treasury supported your subsidy? Yes or no, Lakshita? Yes or no? Yes or no? Has the government
yes,
give you money?
They have. They have. Yes.
Okay. But was it fully given? In other words,
No.
the question, Lakshita, is fundamental. The question is, a part of the subsidy, which is a policy of government, to subsidize electricity, you're not getting compensated for.
Why is partly compensated from
Partly
time to time?
not compensated.
Yes.
Right. The answer is partly not compensated. So I'm moving on. That will require finance and funding. So there will be an interest cost connected with that. So my question to you, Lakshita, then, is if tariff is driven by cost, and we are using the word cost reflective. Now, mind you, at the Maravilla workshop, I debated Nadim and said that that would be an unfair thing to take the losses of the current generation and pass it of a previous generation and pass it on to, can we have people in the audience not to engage in parallel discussions so that we can give the benefit of this discussion to everybody equally? So what I told Nadim is that you cannot pass on inefficiencies to the consumer like that. You need to revisit the balance sheet of the CEB and see how you restructure it. So against that background, let me ask you, if cost reflective is just taking any cost and passing it on, can you tell us what are the components of cost? Operational, non-operational?
Yeah, electricity supply has this very important functional segregation: generation, transmission, and distribution. At each of these points, certain cost components are added. At the point of generation, two types of cost components are added. One thing is it's a fixed cost called the generation capacity cost. That is to invest on generation capacity. Whether you generate or not, you have to invest on certain capacity, which the cost incurred for that is fixed by nature, and it includes the cost for return on investment, depreciation, financial cost, and fixed O&M. That is called the generation capacity cost, which is fixed in nature. Irrespective of you generate or not, you have to incur that. At the point of generation, you have the second cost component, which is called the generation energy cost. When you generate electricity, you have to incur a variable cost. That is the only variable cost in the entire system. When I say variable cost, it varies when the electricity is generated. So at the point of generation, there are two types of cost: generation fixed cost, the capacity cost, and generation energy cost. Then the generated electricity is transmitted to the transmission network, where another fixed cost component is added. We call it the transmission fixed cost. And then from transmission, it goes to distribution. Remember, transmission and distribution are voltage. These are segregated by the voltage levels. Transmission is at very high voltage. The big pylons that you see on the wayside belongs to the transmission network. Then transmitted voltage is passed down to distribution, where another fixed cost component is added. Thereafter, it is supplied to the households, where from the cost, the three types of cost: the generation, energy, generation fixed cost, transmission fixed cost, and distribution fixed cost, it becomes a tariff. The cost becomes a tariff by a mechanism known as pricing of electricity. So how the costs become tariff is subjected to many different combinations and variations we'll discuss as we go along.
Sure. Thank you. So, Akshita, just to stay on that, there are two aspects that I see. That is cost, if indeed it is a function of all of what you said. The source of generation is also a key determinant. Yes. And if so, I would like you to comment on initially, what is the installed capacity, for example, of hydro? What is the installed capacity of thermal and coal and whatever else? If you can give us some numbers so that we can see the relative dependence on the sources.
Those who are at the control room, please help me. I'm very bad at numbers.
There it is.
Yeah, the total capacity as at now, the total installed capacity in megawatts is about 5,000 megawatts. Approximately 2,900 of those comes from renewable, about percentage 58% installed capacity. And another about 2,000, I think 2,100, closer to that, comes from thermal installed capacity. The percentage is 42%. Quick answer.
Yes. Thank you very much. So if that is the case, now we see the value. We see the value of hydropower. And the question I posed is, what is the installed capacity? The very next question I want to ask you is, to what optimum extent? Now we have invested a lot of money, some were grants of the reservoirs, and there are several. There's a capacity the reservoir has, and you have said the installed capacity is so much. Are we making optimum use of the installed hydro capacity?
I think if your question is about whether we are maintaining the existing hydro capacity to the optimum level, yes, we do. I think your question is coming from the fact that there are a lot of talk in the society that our storage capacities are not utilized to the full.
Because I interrupt you for a minute. Very good. I think yes, you hit the nail on the head. Basically, what I want to mention is that this thought actually triggered many years ago in my mind. We see when there is excess rain, sluice gates are opened and water is sent out. Now, you know, there are countries that have rainwater harvesting. So the first thing that comes to our mind is, sometimes we don't have power, sometimes we have too much of water, and the hydropower, the renewable, results in the cost going down. The FAO at one stage many years ago, or 20 years ago, I won an assignment for the Coopers and Librarian, where we were going to Kotmale and we looked at some infrastructure that the FAO has set up to gauge siltation of the reservoirs. So I'm naively saying, and I would invite you to bash my question, that is it possible that because the siltation level, although gauged in a particular way, there is no desiltation, it's like having a glass full of sand, right? I would like you to very clearly tell me, is desiltation happening? Are we making maximum use of the capacity? Over to you.
We do. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ranil, for asking that question. There's a lot of big misconception in the society about these. If you take large reservoirs, they have two types of reservoir storages. One is called the dead storage, and the other one is called the live storage. The very reason why we keep a dead storage is to accumulate the silt that is estimated to come during the entire lifetime of the reservoir. As long as your silt has not gone beyond the dead storage, that will not affect the live storage. I will give you some numbers. I was once working at the Samalaya power station, that is why I remember the number. It is the fourth largest reservoir in the country in terms of water storage capacity. The total storage capacity of Samalaya reservoir is 288 million cubic meters, 288, out of which 60 million cubic meters has been kept as dead storage, for the very reason to accumulate the silt that would be coming along the reservoir during the entire lifetime of the reservoir. So all the large reservoirs, they have not, silt had not accumulated to the extent that it had exceeded their storage, except one reservoir, Rantembe, Other than that, I don't think any reservoir, large reservoirs, I'm not referring to the small irrigation reservoirs, have exceeded their debt storage.
Excellent. So, if you're saying, you said, I think a little while earlier, that we are making optimum use of our hydroelectric capacity. Does anyone else want to make a comment on that? Tilak?
Ranil, a quick comment.
Sure.
If a reservoir never overflows, the design is wrong.
Okay.
Because you cannot build a reservoir to capture the historically highest rainfall
Right.
and the flow rate.
Right.
If you try to do it, your dam will be too tall,
Yeah.
and you would have inundated an unnecessarily large area,
Yes.
relocating a lot of people just to be used
Yeah.
in the highest rainfall year.
Good. Now, I'm convinced with what Tilak and Daksha said. But a question I have is this. About 15 years ago, while reviewing the central bank annual report, and I have actually written articles on this to find out what the answer is. Now, isn't it fair to say you guys are CEV? But, not you, Tilak, yes, but both of you. How much do you pay the Mahaveli for use of their water? Do you pay anything? Yes or no?
No.
You don't pay, right? Now, I am the Mahaveli authority, say, I would negotiate with the cabinet to get a charge. The reason is this. Around the time I was looking at electricity and hydro and all that many years ago, Tilak, Lakshita Buddhika, you might recall, there was a dam burst in Pakistan, right? And you know when a dam bursts, it inundates villages. Very serious matter. Now, how do you build safeguards against the dam bursting? I found the central bank report, like I said 15 years ago. Anyone who likes, I can give the exact number if I check back with my records at home. The requirement from the Mahaveli Authority of Sri Lanka for dam maintenance was 30 million rupees per year. Hazard a guess, how much did they get? They got 3 million rupees. So my concern is, I don't want to scare people, but to what extent, not a question actually you can answer, but I'm asking you, if you are dependent so much to hydro, if you're saying that the optimum usage is maintained, if you're saying, Ranel, your desalination talk is nonsense, we are addressing that. I'm asking you, and you're also not paying the Mahaveli Authority for maintaining the dams, right? Then will there be a possibility of a dam breach because you're not maintaining?
We can always pay Mahaveli Authority as long as all the electrical consumers here, we will simply pass down the cost to you. If you're ready to bear that additional cost, we are more than willing to pay back
Taking
the
your
Mahaveli
challenge
Authority.
on, you prove to me that you're not charging interest. We are accountants, some of us here. Are you charging an interest cost in the tariff that you can avoid charging?
There's a
Then
big,
I'll pay you the Mahaveli fee.
there is a big legacy debt that we had inherited.
Okay, we'll pause there. There is a legacy debt. We'll pause there and remember to bring it up again. There is a legacy debt of the CEB, and the cost of that, I see some fund managers and accountants. This is a very interesting point. I would like someone to prove to me that there is no unnecessary debt or accumulated inefficient management of finances debt, which has an interest cost, and that is embedded in the cost which drives your tariff. We'll pause there and allow you to fight another day on that. But my question now is actually, if that is hydro, can I ask you very quickly to tell me what is the installed capacity of thermal, coal and other?
Coal, of course, 900 megawatts, 3 megawatt, 100 megawatt into 3 at Norachole. And altogether, thermal, CEB thermal and private thermal, you can see, possibly see on the screen, 1,197 megawatts.
So Lakshita, we are actually heavily dependent. The next high level of dependence is coal.
Out of thermal, 900 is coal, 1,197 is oil.
Yeah,
out of thermal.
right. Okay, all right.
The
Sorry.
bottom part is
So, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. So basically, if hydro is 1, thermal is almost close to that. 1,100 as opposed to 1,400.
yes.
Right.
Yes.
And the next is coal. But it would also be fair to say the hydro of 1.4 is a combination of several hydropowers,
Yes.
not one. But
Yes.
coal is just one, isn't it?
One power plant.
One coal power plant,
Yes.
one single coal power plant. And this, let's pause there, is important when we discuss what is provided for in the Act vis-a-vis what is provided for in the Act vis-a-vis how you invite private participation. So let's pause there. Our dependence on hydro, it is intended to discuss this later on in the session, but I think the current Act provides for hydro not to be privatized. Am I right, Buddhika? Yeah. But coal and other things may be available for privatization pursuant to the new Act, right? Okay. Tilak, with regard to the equity and debt structure, I earlier alluded to, is the balance sheet debt equity structuring right? You're not an accountant, but I'm asking you whether you can assume, based on your knowledge of electricity, capacity,
In CA Sri Lanka, we engineers should not be talking about
doesn't matter.
your profession, your profession, but I can say the following. CB has a accumulated debt, which first I would like to call it working capital related debt, or in simpler terms, as anybody would understand, if the cost and the price are not equal, CB finance manager has to find the money to run the institution next month. So he has to get a overdraft. And if the electricity price is not changed from 2014 to 2022, I'm sure he has visited the nearby banks many, many times.
I'm going to interrupt you to say, because I believe that's what you're trying to say. We have a regulator, the PUCSL. The PUCSL approves tariff increases like anywhere in the world. Are you trying to say that the PUCSL, from what little I know, the PUCSL did not allow the CEB to increase the tariff? Is that right?
Well, that's my interpretation, because
For how long?
2014 to 2022.
So that's a lot of time.
Give me a minute to elaborate. The Electricity Act says there shall be a tariff methodology. Tariff from a broad sense of the word tariff. So is there a tariff methodology? Yes, there is a tariff methodology. Then it also says that there shall be a timetable to implement responsibilities of various parties. Is there one? Yes, there is one. There is a gazette dated 2016 which spells out each party, what should they do by which timetable. So what I see is that LECO and CEB have fulfilled their obligations according to the legal instruments, not exactly on time, sometimes a little bit behind schedule, but and PUC has also met their obligations reasonably until 2013. Thereafter, things started getting into, I would say, in a disorganized stage.
Okay.
2014, the president announced from the election stage that the electricity price will go down by 25%. PUC immediately approved it. So that's
Again,
not what
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute.
Yeah.
This is what I call, and I want you to challenge me on this. In a market economy, we don't necessarily have a freedom of the wild entrepreneur. A market economy is sustained in the future by having a regulator. That is why the central bank licenses banks, but stands as a regulator so that the licensee operates within a certain parameter. The same with the stock market. I've been chairman of the SEC. We license brokers, we license the stock exchange, but the regulator steps in. Now here, there is a term that Governor Kumarasamy and I used to often talk about. Political interference leading to regulatory forbearance. if the regulator is not allowed to intervene either to improve tariff, or the regulator is not intervening to ensure that losses and inefficiencies are not charged to the consumer, that is political interference. So, Tilak, am I right in saying that was political interference which restrained the PUCL even approving a tariff that goes down?
Yes, that's how I have to interpret it. I
Right.
really do not know what exactly went on
Sure.
inside these boardrooms.
But we are all aware of that.
Yes, of course,
Yeah.
that's what we see. So 2014 to 2022, I see LECO and CB making submissions, and these submissions being approved, cost being approved, but a corresponding tariff adjustment not being given.
Right.
And this is the period in which many power plants were cancelled by the politicians owing to various reasons.
Right.
And then the cost was actually going up. So the cost goes up, the price is not adjusted. So therefore, the result is very clear.
Right.
At the time the country entered the economic crisis, probably there was about 500, in excess of 500 billion rupees, which was about double the annual revenue of the power sector as a whole, in what I would call short-term debts, which means cumulatively overdrafts,
Right.
not project-related debts.
I know. Tilak, you've answered that question far better than any chartered accountant that I know. And there are chartered accountants in the audience. If I may summarize what Tilak says, and again, this is connected with what I mentioned earlier. Within this tariff, is there a cost? Within that cost, is there an interest cost? As a result of several things. One, bad financial management. You are speaking about working capital. There are corporate leaders here in this audience. They do treasury management and working capital management and equity restructuring. So as a result of you engineers not having any say how the balance sheet that you represent runs, you will probably have an equity debt structure which is inappropriate. Now, I am stressing this point because I have not been getting a proper answer to this from anyone. Tilak, thank you for enlightening me. So essentially what Tilak is saying is what I said earlier. If you're not fully compensated for your subsidies, there is an interest cost. If you're not allowed to increase the tariff like you should, when cost increases, the tariff has to go up, and you suddenly accumulate a whole lot of debt, and there is interest on that, and then you up the tariff because the IMF wants, and I say this with responsibility, I am making a bold statement here. I believe that this tariff is unjustified, it is not just and equitable, and it's a disincentive for households as well as industries if we are going to improve the competitiveness. There's a lot of talk about doing business. There's a lot of talk about competitiveness. But competitiveness is a function of so many things, one of which is the cost of energy. So, moving on to Lakshita, before we invest in new hydro and all of that, you as a CEB has what you call it your long-term generation expansion plan. So if generation mix is important for costing and tariff, and generation mix is within your jurisdiction, and this, what was shown earlier, is the source of generation, and you as a board of directors decides to have investment in generation of a certain kind. It can be additional. Hydro is limited, so it should obviously have to be either thermal or coal or solar or whatever. How do you determine where you invest in that new generation expansion?
May I explain, taking about a minute or two, explain how we arrived at the generation mix?
Sure.
Because you used the exact word that is should be used, because there's a misconception in the society that people think the way to bring down costs is to generate more from one source and less from another source. Not correct. Always it is the correct generation mix that would bring down the overall cost. For example, as at now, the most expensive generating source at hand is generating a unit from diesel, which costs well over 100 rupees. But even under given circumstances, generating from diesel can be the lowest cost option. Generating from diesel can be bringing down the overall cost, even much more than having coal, which costs less than 25 rupees a unit at the current, when you take the current stock of coal at Norachole. For example, if the requirement is to have a 100 megawatt power plant and that power plant is only to be operated 2 hours a day, the option would be to go for diesel. So as a result, it's always the generation mix that determines the cost and not going more from a particular source or less from another source. So how do we determine the generation mix? There again, there are a lot of misconceptions in the society. A lot of people think that we decide the generation mix in order to bring the total cost down. No, that is only one consideration. The generation mix is decided based on 3 criteria. This is called the energy trilemma. Don't look for dictionary in this word. There's no such word in the dictionary. This is a word coined by the World Energy Council. When you decide the correct generation mix, you have to balance 3 things. One is the cost of supply, the economic part. The second is the security and the reliability of supply. And third one is the environmental sustainability. When you imagine these as the 3 legs of a triangle, if you try to achieve more on one side, if you try to bring down the cost, your reliability will go up, reliability will come down. If you try to achieve more of environment sustainability and try to achieve more of green energy, your cost can go up. A lot of people think the way to go is they simply make a bold statement and say, go for more renewable, your cost will come down. It is not so. For example, during the last 3 consecutive years, we generated over 50% from renewables. Is our cost low? Even as at now, if you take the current energy cost, the electricity energy cost, remember I told you about 3 cost components at the point of generation. If you take the energy cost, there are 5 thermal power stations that can generate a unit of electricity less than the price what we pay for solar. But it still doesn't mean that solar is bad or we have to go for thermal. No, when you are deciding the correct mix, we have always, it is all about deciding the correct mix where the solar has to play a part, coal has to play a part, diesel has to play a part. And this mix is decided by the process, what we call long-term generation expansion planning. It's a very complicated process.
Good. Now, you haven't answered one question. I said if you were a board of directors and it's within your jurisdiction, like any corporate, to decide where you invest, taking your not dilemma but trilemma into account and taking into account all other considerations, that your objective is not only least cost but a balance, right?
Yes.
My question that you didn't answer is how much. I asked you whether you have complete jurisdiction to take that decision. Tilak, Buddhika, can I ask you to answer that question? If generation mix is a key consideration, I would like Tilak also to answer that, and Buddhika, whichever way you want to go, whatever sequence. I'm asking you whether you have total freedom, independence, technical freedom to decide on the mix, or is there influence either from government or lobbying from the private sector?
I think Rakshita can.
Buddhika, go. Yeah,
Can I, being a former planner, can I give an answer?
you can certainly give an answer.
This is entirely up to the planners to decide. Nobody intervened. To be fair by everybody, nobody intervened except by giving policy. Government has the right to give policies. So the energy trilemma, the 3 competing objectives are balanced and the optimum mix is decided by the planners subjected to the government policy. So if planners are given a free hand, they will go for the optimum mix.
You have just contradicted yourself. You said the planners are not interfered with.
Yes.
At the same time, you're saying that the government has the right to dictate policy.
Yes.
We are not here to make be favorable towards the government or otherwise. I am asking you whether you have unfettered freedom to take the right decision, and I think I'm going to not ask you that question. I'm going to ask your colleague, Buddhika. Do you have total freedom, or is policy from up above?
Yeah. Now, the government has the right to issue policy guidelines. However, these guidelines has to be justified, right? The policy guidelines. These policies had to be decided based on some kind of study, some kind of rationale. So the issue was actually there are some policies issued to the planners without any backing studies. Rationale. So that drives the prices up.
Right.
That's the price.
Let me
That's
pause
the
there.
issue.
Do you agree with what he said?
Of course, agree. Because whenever a policy comes at a cost. And that will take off the planners the liberty to decide the optimum mix.
Okay, pause there. So your liberty has been taken. Tilak, can you comment on that? I'm asking you whether there is interference outside the independence of planning and consequently any implication. Tilak, I want you as an independent of the CEB to give me, if possible, examples of what has happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years, which is interference which takes away from the right generation mix.
All right. Let's clearly identify what policy is and what planning is.
Sure.
Before policies are established, there has to be what is called policy analysis, which means, say for example, the most recent and the most talked of policy decision taken by the then president in 2019, that Sri Lanka will achieve, at times he said 80%, sometimes he said 70%, finally 70% a share of renewable energy by 2030.
Right.
So do you think there was a lot of analysis in 2018 and early part of 2019 to analyze the pros and cons, what are the costs and what additional investments would be required and what emission reductions would happen? No, zero. Actually zero. All right. So the policy is dictated and the utilities have to follow the policy.
Good.
So we do not know whether it is optimal or not.
Right.
Then there is the other angle. You talked about freedom. Yes, I think planners have the freedom. When you look at the books, planning books that come out of CEB every 2 years, you see there's a lot of freedom. But the problem is interference in the implementation of the planned projects, particularly generation.
Right.
You do not hear that much about transmission and distribution, because generation is where the business is, right, as you know. And of course, generation is where there is a lot of public protests and
Sure.
that kind of activity as well, sometimes quite rightly. So we can take as many examples as you like.
Sure.
If you like, I can start from
No,
1982.
let me tell you, Riaz Mila, who was supposed to come, had played golf in the morning and sprained himself. He's not here. But like I mentioned to you just before we started, in the late 90s, he was on the board of the CEB, and I was in independent practice, and he asked me to evaluate a Broadlands proposal. Now this goes back 20 years. Is that Broadlands name familiar with you?
Yeah, correct.
Apparently the last vestige of hydropower. And I'm going to name names because it is nothing sensitive or whatever it is. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was an Australian company, Smoky Mountain Energy Corporation or something like that. Australians and Malaysians, they were lobbying the government, saying that the engineers are waiting for a facilitation payment, and therefore they are not allowed to go ahead and produce power and feed the national grid. I said I want 2 experts which are electrical. I evaluated it. I was convinced that what was being asked for by the Australian Malaysian combined was unfair. This is based on considerable analysis and depth and thinking. I invited the consortium members to come and visit me because I had a mandate from the CEB board to do an independent report. When they sat in front of me, they couldn't justify the then exorbitant amount of money they wanted per kilowatt hour. So I rejected their proposal, put them back on the drawing board. So then there was some heat on me. A relative of mine called me and said, we knew that you were going to block this. I said, it's not blocking. But don't try to milk a government, which results in the government then having to strangle households and industries. So I'm asking you again, although you have been very diplomatic, basically you, I think, love to talk about generation mix from what I know. But you're constrained in identifying the right generation mix in my view. Can we settle for that? Good. Then moving on. This all leads up to the independence we require from this new act. If reform is because of an inefficient CEB, corrupt CEB, etc., now we see there is another angle to this. We are talking about financial governance. We are talking about debt equity structuring. We are talking about subsidies. We are talking about interference. Okay? So, Lakshita, or rather, going back to renewables, Tilak. Again, we are trying to please the international targets for renewable energy, net zero and all that. And therefore, this percentage of renewable versus non-renewable is given. In my research and readings, I have found that there is a well of support to question that. Let me try to explain. The global south is dictated to going into renewables, and there are countries with those targets. Consequently, nobody picks at what is the cost or the source of funds which would fund those renewables. I thought there was a slide we discussed yesterday or so, Buddhika, I know which slide that is, where there was a comparison, Tilak, of the renewables versus non-renewables in the region. Can we have that slide?
You mean the share?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Tilak, can you explain? There is even today, a friend of mine has written about renewables extensively, basically even insulting the CEB and the policy planners, right? I won't name him, but I invited him, he didn't want to come. That again, you can't chicken out, this whole idea is to thrash out ideas. So I'm mentioning something to you. That is, as a result of these targets set at an apex level, global level, consequently national level, you shall have renewables to this extent. There's a cost of investing in those renewables. Do you believe that the targets we have set for ourselves, those are the policy guidelines, Lakshita? Do you think that is, within a Sri Lankan context, fair?
Well, I cannot say it is unfair or fair, but I would have preferred a good analysis and for the policymaker and all the stakeholders to have a good understanding before such decisions are made. So this slide is actually giving the renewable share versus the total in South Asia on the left-hand side and Southeast Asia on the right-hand side.
Right.
So Singapore is the country that we want to be like, isn't it? 5% renewables. All right.
You see that?
Of course, we have Malaysia, 16%, Indonesia, 18%. Where is Bangladesh? 1%. India, 22%. So you see,
Sri Lanka,
51.
Yeah.
But countries that have a lower percentage of renewables have much lower electricity prices to customers.
Now that I want to pause on. If the quest of a target is to have affordable electricity for households and industries, and if the perception is we need to go into renewables in order to get to that level, I think there's a big question mark what it is. So If any of you want to make any comment on that, please do now. Otherwise, I need to go on. Given that the new act is doing the unbundling to enable what the 2002 act also enabled, to invite private participation on the premise that in order to invest in anything, and if you focus on the government needing to focus on health and education and all of that, if there is a possibility to allow private participation, Lakshit, the question to you is, do you believe that the current act is clear? Is there clarity in the current act with regard to how you enable private participation and where?
It's very clear. Even current act allows private participation at the point of generation. We have been having private investments for generation. We call them the independent power producers in the mid 1990s. But we specifically don't allow private participation for investments and ownership in the transmission and distribution. But generation is clearly open out for private investments in the current act. I'm not referring to the draft act, the current act, the present Electricity Act.
That is 2009 act.
2009 Act, yes.
Fine. What I'm asking, then I'll connect you up with what we discussed, or rather didn't discuss earlier. In the late 1990s, you said mid 1990s, I think it was the late 1990s, correct me if I'm wrong, Tilak, where Asia Power came in. I'm very familiar with that. Asia Power in 98 or 99 or thereabouts. They were given as an IPP a tariff for 20 years power purchase agreement, take or pay formula, right? That is, yeah, whether you, and also a dollar denominated one, where the exchange rate movement is also they are cushioned against. Oil price movement they are cushioned against, a thermal power plant.
Yes, the
Asia
independent power producer agreements, there were a total of 10, and I think the 11th one was signed some time ago. All of them, there's a lot of misunderstandings on this subject as well. If I simplistically say, it's take or pay for capacity and take and pay for energy.
Right.
It's just like leasing out a car.
Right.
So you have to pay the lease if you leave it in your garage
That's a
for
problem.
days on end.
Right.
And the moment you drive it, you have to pay for the fuel. That's how most IPP contracts are structured in the region or elsewhere. But my complaint is that most of these did not come on a competitive basis.
Absolutely. So connect the new act there. Is there adequate clarity? I am not convinced that competitive bidding, entertainment of unsolicited proposals, I think it's quite weak in the current bill. Buddhika?
Yeah, even now in 2022, the cabinet appointed a committee to make recommendation with regard to the new new Electricity Act, and this committee recommends in their section 29, Sri Lanka needs to move away from practices such as accepting unsolicited proposals towards a procurement framework that is transparent, fair, and competitive.
Sure.
Now, what I have to tell something about the history. The 2009 Act has a very solid clause with regard to competitive bidding, and it recommends it requires tendering. Now, in 2022, government went ahead with amending the Act and paved way.
I think slide, relevant slide is up.
I think.
Yeah, that is the 2009 Act. And also at the bottom, we elaborate 4 methods.
Can I have the 19th slide? Yeah.
19th slide, please. Like, okay, there it is. Buddhika?
Now, what happened was, in 2022, government went ahead with amending the bill and CB Engineers Union vehemently protested. Despite the protest, they paved way to unsolicited proposals. And there came a list of proposals, unsolicited proposals, and I don't think none of them has
They were good.
realized. But the issue is, the committee recommends for transparent competitive bidding.
Right.
The question is whether the new act, the new bill,
Yeah,
provides
exactly.
that
So
transparency.
you have the same doubt I have.
Yeah.
Lakshita, what do you think?
Can I add something?
Sure.
Now, what the new draft bill says that when it comes to the procurement of the power, it says it has to follow national procurement guidelines. Then that now, as I know, these national procurement guidelines published in 2006, and later it get amended, but there's a process now. They are trying to amend it again, and we don't know whether the unsolicited proposals are allowed in this new national procurement guideline. So we require a solid clause that ensure competitive bidding, and by that we can by ensuring transparency, only that we can give the confidence to entrepreneurs or investors,
Right.
to come and
I fully agree with you. This is why I took pains, while I am providing all this time on a pro bono gratis basis, I invited the Transparency International Executive Director and the Deputy Executive Director to be here. None of whom are here. So I think it is important for them, and I say this publicly, to engage in debates of this nature, to go beyond the reports and the academics. Right? Can we rest this case on the basis that we are unsure because a bill was gazetted in December? There have been many committees and many representations, submissions on the cutoff date of January 3rd. But to date, what is missing is that we are unsure whether some of those have been incorporated in the act. Now, I see certain members of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce here. Some of them on their phones, but if I may invite their attention. How much at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, I was on the main committee many years ago, have you lobbied the government about these issues? Because if I go back many years, when I brought this up in the main committee of the chamber about unsolicited proposals, there was a member of the chamber who said that there are countries that permit unsolicited proposals. Now, he represented a company that is infamous for submitting unsolicited proposals. And more recently, even during the Yahapalne government or the good governance government, I recall even the key economic council guys who are now in another party saying that either Denmark or Norway, Scandinavian countries, permit unsolicited proposals. And that once you submit a proposal, that you get extra mark when they open it out for RFPs. Right? So I don't want to dwell on this, except that I am seeking the cooperation to the Thought Leadership Forum's initiatives of the chambers of commerce. Not to have economic summits, and the Institute of Chartered Accountants not to have annual conference, but to get to the meat, get to the bone, as it were, to discuss how do we engage the government in order to bring some decency, openness, transparency, justice, equity, and reasonableness in the provisions of the Act. So, thank you, Buddhika, thank you, Lakshita. If anyone has any, yes, Tilak, please.
Competition versus non-competitive procurement, it has two angles. The non-competitive procurement can be an unsolicited proposal, subsequently negotiated,
Right.
or it can also be what we call a feed-in tariff,
Right.
which means there's a standardized price.
Right.
Everybody gets the same price. Say, for example, your rooftop.
Right.
So now whether that price is fair
Yeah.
to bring a reasonable return on investment to
Sure.
the investor,
Right.
your small 5 kilowatt rooftop,
Right.
as well as to the 1 megawatt solar park,
Right.
is questionable.
Right.
Then, of course, if I may give an example, Ranel,
Sure.
your rooftop,
Yeah.
if you sign now, you get 37 rupees.
Right.
And that price was announced in August 22.
Right.
And when it was announced, I was surprised
Yeah.
because the previous price was 22.
Right.
But I quickly went into my financial model and realized, no, 37 is correct.
Right.
So since August 22, the exchange rate has eased out.
Right.
Bank interest rates have come down.
Right.
Inflation has come down.
Right.
But even if you sign today, you are still paid 37 for the next 20 years.
Right.
Good. So is that fair for the electricity customer who subsequently
Absolutely.
purchases that electricity?
Excellent
I would like
point.
to stop. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
like to stop by showing one slide
Yeah.
because there is a thinking that competition in renewable energy doesn't work.
Yeah.
Um,
So the slide is about competitive bidding
yes.
for renewable energy.
Oh, you picked the correct slide. So, of course, in 2015, the government at that time, about which I have such a lot of complaints about how they handle the sector, but they did one good thing. Pushed CB to go for competition in procurement of renewables of medium-sized, 10 megawatt. And see how the prices came down by 35%. 35%.
35%.
So this data is available publicly in the CB website. Similarly, solar parks. Up to solar park number 8 was on a committee decided price. It's not unsolicited, but it's a standardized committee designed price. And come competition, of course, it took a few years for it to be built.
Sure.
Price went down to 18 rupees, roughly 30%.
Tilak, can we have that slide back, please? I don't know why they moved
Same
the
slide.
The same slide back, please. Right. Now, if there's any way in which the control tower can expand this a little bit, I just want to emphasize on what Tilak said. Look on your left-hand side, audience's left-hand side. It says 2015, 19 is
43.
the rupees per kilowatt hour paid. It dropped to 13. So
Yes.
that is what he meant by the 35% drop. From 2015 to 2020, pursuant to competition being introduced and openness and transparency, that is an achievement on cost containment. Look on the other side. If you take a look at 2017, because there is a time lag in these eventually becoming tangible, from 23 rupees, I remember that tariff time. I know lots of people, including today's writer, who was lobbying for those numbers. It has dropped to 17.
Yes.
We are running out of time, so I want to quickly move on, and I'm going to mention to the audience and to the panel, when I discuss this concept of, or rather the issues about private participation, my intention was also to talk about energy security. Foreign players coming in, our dependence on foreign players. For example, if you give coal power, now there seems to be an affection for India. I also have affection for India. Looks like all political parties have affection for India. So whether the coal power will go to Adani, I'll say quickly. Yeah. So moving on, I'm going to skip those two. I'm going to also skip a concept that I proposed to current president when he was Minister of Industries about the concept of minimum shareholding is the, you're hearing me, right? Thailand, under the Board of Investment of Thailand, which is the Board of Investment model that we adopted in 1991, they had proportional privileges, and one of those was minimum Thai shareholding. They said, we will give you BOI approval, promotional privileges, but we break down sectors. We recognize that we want to build an indigenous Thai business community, and therefore we need to take poultry operation. Thailand is a large country. There is room for foreign players, but we want Thailand, nationals of Thailand, to have 60% in poultry operation. We recognize that in the information technology, communications technology arena, we need investment, and much of that investment may have to be foreign because of the technical connection. Therefore, we are permitting 90%. The question to you, and I would like a quick yes or no answer because sadly we are running out of time. Do you propose that in areas that it's possible to have the capacity for domestic people to invest, should we have a minimum Sri Lankan shareholding? It captures building an indigenous business community as well as energy security. Lakshita.
It's very difficult to give you a short answer, but my mainly interest is not on the investment percentage of investment, but the percentage of local value addition. You have to ensure that there's sufficient local value addition. Right from the time we open out investments for mini hydropower plants, if you allow me to elaborate 2-3 minutes. Yes. When the sector was opened out for private sector investments back in the mid-1990s, we now have 214 operational mini hydropower plants, all owned by the private sector. It is not only the investments that they brought in, they came up with the people who can provide technology in all the steps of the value chain in constructing a mini hydropower plant. As a result, these players that we open out the sector to invest are now doing very well in other countries. So I will read out a very small sentence in the National Energy Policy. Thank you for bringing this up. It says, considering the limitations to the scale of markets available in Sri Lanka to breed technology-intensive local businesses. Of course, we don't have a big market for things like automobile industry. The relatively large size of the energy sector should be utilized to nurture local entrepreneurship. This is very important, Ranil. Renewable or whatever targets are not about achieving X megawatts of renewables or whatever capacity by this year, but during the process also we must try to allow the private investors, the people who are the entrepreneurs, to use the relatively large size of the power sector so that we can build up the technology industry. This is exactly what, for example, the people who started doing EPC contracts with the CEB are now putting up power plants in other countries. The people who started EPC contracts in the transmission infrastructure doing very well overseas.
I'm going to interrupt you there because we are running out of time. I want to, by a show of hands, ask the audience, anyone who is with a chamber community, thus far you heard much of what we discussed. Have you engaged the government on the importance of some of these things that we discussed? If there is anyone from the chamber, otherwise I am going to name people. Yeah. Manil, aren't you on the main committee of the chamber? No. So please, we are not having questions off the floor, but if you can, I urge you to use the question card, anyone who is representing a chamber, to say that you have engaged the government and in connection with what. So moving on very quickly, and we are going to shortly pause for the Q&A session where we will invite the question cards. Now, one of the concerns I have is that consumer protection legislation, there was, I think, if I recall well, in the 2002 Act, under which I was the Monitoring and Advisory Committee chairman. The 2002 Act had some very good safeguards. The 2002 Act brought in LECO and CEB, collapsed it and unbundled. Now, I have some questions there because that is not exactly the way it's happening. In addition, the unbundled companies, which we will call successor companies, were to be incorporated under the register of companies. There shall be, they said, a monitoring and advisory committee, and that monitoring and advisory committee shall comprise of a nominee from the Institute of Engineers, and I think we have many members of the IESL here, a nominee of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Manjula, a nominee of the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs to represent interests of the consumer, a Deputy Secretary Treasury, and that was Mr. Padmanathan, Secretary of the Ministry of Power and Energy, and so on and so forth. And the minister, who was then Mr. Karu Jayasuriya, was allowed to nominate only 2 persons. So this committee of 8 we sat, and the act provided for us to receive from every successor company, Genco, Transco, and the 5 or so distribution companies, and the service company, statements of corporate intent. Now, these statements of corporate intent, the case of generation might have been even about, investing in generation and things like that. And we as a MAC could reject the SCI or recommend it to the minister whereupon it's gazetted, or rather adopted. The second thing was that the monitoring and advisory committee shall identify directors for the successor company boards. And it says that the minister shall not appoint, nor shall a minister terminate the services. Minister cannot appoint or terminate a director of any of those boards, except otherwise than through the approval or the recommendations of the monitoring and advisory committee. That's how we developed 70 directors, and I handed over those directors to the minister and to the then minister, Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe. But of course, the government was swept out of office by 2004. We had 10 months of work, and this act, the 2005 act, rather 2002 act, was put on the back burner, and this went on to 2005, government change. It was shelved again and again and again, and come 2009, a new act. So the current act, from what I understand, the current bill, says the minister shall appoint a National Electricity Advisory Council. Now, the mandate of the NEAC is to develop national electricity policy. The minister is interfering in all that. So I think, Tilak, Buddhika and Lakshita, I'm asking you whether we are going backwards here. We are progressing as a country towards non-interference of a president or prime minister or cabinet or minister into the workings of what we like to have technically qualified people working in these boards. So I am going to only ask you a yes or no question. Do you think the current bill, the gazetted one, which provides for minister's appointment, should be amended? Yes or no, Lakshita?
Yes, from me.
Buddhika?
Yes, for me.
Tilak?
Yes, very significantly it has to be amended.
Emphatic? Yes, thank you. Moving on, the 2002 Act provided for, and that's I think how Mr. Karu Jayasuriya was able to get it passed by even the opposition's endorsement, or rather, particularly JVP. The 2002 Act provided for the Secretary to the Treasury. Are you hearing me well? There was a battery problem here, and now it's supposed to be okay. The Secretary Treasury shall, the wording is, basically what it means is, with the approval of Parliament. That is, no cabinet can do it. Only with the approval of Parliament, the Secretary Treasury can divest the shares of the successor companies. With, of course, a proviso, however, 10% of the shares shall be allocated to the employees. And that is the way NDB was privatized. Many of those privatizations took place. But the current act is completely silent on that. So while you said private participation is very clear, Lakshita, with due respect, I would like to disagree with you that in my book, there is inadequate clarity with regard to how this process of divestment takes place. And again, I would like to think that if you want the employees to buy in, I'm making a bold statement here, I think the government needs to go back on the drawing board with regard to reconsidering the provisions of the 2002 Act. Would you agree with me, Lakshita, Buddhika and Tilak? With regard to private participation?
Let me start. Yes, certainly. There are some safeguards with regard to the percentage of private participation in the successor companies. The bill, as of December 5th, is silent on the shareholding of the distribution companies.
Okay.
But in the successor transmission via company, it says the government will continue to hold 50% of the shares. In the national system operator, which is basically the bulk power procurement company, the bill says it will be 100% government owned.
Yeah.
Then the bill also says that the hydropower company will be 100% government owned.
Right.
And it is silent about the ownership limitations of the other companies, such as the wind power company, coal power company, thermal power company, etc.
Right. Thank you, Tilak. Here, one of the things that was provided for both in the 2009 Act and the 2002 Act is a very important point. There is provision that the conversion of government-owned or public corporations to companies will be based on an act. And that act provides for valuations of assets, human resource audits, none of which is in the current bill. Am I right? None of which is in the current bill. Where I am a little concerned, because divestment is necessarily followed by, and we've all been through privatizations, divestments in the 89 to 93 period, right? Where valuation was a very key consideration. The government valuer sometimes, with no disrespect to the government valuer, was unable to do valuations. And there are a few chartered accountants here who might recall that I was very actively engaged on behalf of a large company called John Keel's. The chairman was here a few minutes ago. Krishan Parendra himself was here, where we put in bids for privatizations, which required us to value this business enterprise. So this is a very key consideration, and my worry is that unless there is technical competence in a committee that engages in the valuation, technical evaluation committees, openness, transparency, that we may end up selling off our national assets at a less than achievable price. Lakshita, Buddhika, Tilak, any comments? You agree?
Yes, I do agree, but in fairness to the people who have drafted the bill, there is something called transition provisions, which are yet to be developed after the act becomes law.
Yeah. But Tilak, my point is this. I've been around in this country for long. Even the Securities and Exchange Commission bill, I put it for public consultation. Because of prorogation of Parliament, nothing happened while we were in office. Government changed. It took another long time. But on the last day, even without proper clarity, something small was changed. Not something small, something important. So you're diplomatically saying you're giving it to the people who drafted. That is so fundamental to me. It's about national assets. We are trying to seek the buy-in of the trade unions. We are trying to seek the buy-in of large stakeholders in this country who would otherwise object to the privatization or divestment. Therefore, if there's clarity, openness, honesty, and sincerity, then people will raise their hands and say, I vote for it. That is my problem.
overall, Ranil, there had been very little consultation, or I would say zero consultation, when compared with certain bills that were prepared in the mid, say 2005, 6, 7.
Sure.
There was a lot of consultation and participation of many stakeholders. For
Yes.
example, the Sustainable Energy Authority Act.
Sure.
But such consultation has not been done.
That's a great pity because, see, the thing is, even in the private sector, there are certain companies that have a top-down approach. Others I have participated in where you raise the concerns, the irritants of the people who are eating, thinking, drinking that organization. You guys are, right? So, Buddhika, I want a yes or no answer to this because of limitation of time and only. The question is, was there adequate public consultation, stakeholder consultation, consultation of you guys in the engineering unions with regard to the act?
We had meetings, but not proper consultation.
Not proper consultation. Okay,
Yep.
now let me
Wish-
turn the heat on to you. If you are a union and you have some kind of quote unquote proprietary interest in this organization that you're part of, don't you have an obligation, whether you're consulted or not, to make submissions? Did you make submissions?
Yeah, of course. Now we were told that before the draft bill going to Parliament, it will be shared with us for our comments. But that never happens, and with time went on, we decided to give a comprehensive report in June 2022. This report,
Right.
and after the gazetting of the draft bill, we made 2 submissions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you did. I think when I inquired a little earlier, we have a limitation of time. Otherwise, I would have been happy to even present it here. That I think from what I have done, my due diligence, because I am here as an independent, I'm not lobbying for the country's reform agenda, which I like to see happen. I'm not lobbying for any quarter of any kind, but I make bold to say that there's an inadequate consultation, despite which the engineering union has made a series of submissions, which are yet available for any committee or cabinet to consider. With that, can I invite our MC again?
An absolutely insightful discussion, and thank you very much to our panelists and discussion catalyst. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we shall move on to the question and answer session. We hope you all have written your question on the question card which had been provided to you. And if you already haven't handed over your question card, please be good enough to hand it over to one of our representatives who will be collecting the card from you right now. And also a quick reminder, ladies and gentlemen, the Thought Leadership Forum regrets that we will be restrained in entertaining any questions off the floor, and our discussion catalyst, Mr. Ranel Wijesinha, will endeavor to accommodate every possible question. Over to you once again, Mr. Wijesinha.
Thank you, Kasuni. What we decided to do was we want to give every voice an opportunity. The Thought Leadership Forum is a solution forum, not a problem identification forum. We are also independent, objective, devoid of political bias, and devoid of any private vested interest. So, what we thought is if we allow questions off the floor in this limited period of time, we would not be able to manage it. So we are, again, I'm stressing the point, I'll wait another 5 minutes, but you're most welcome to write your questions even as we go along. We have approximately another 50 minutes here. My apologies, the Q&A session was promised to be 60 minutes. We have like 50 minutes. And that is because we went a little over. We'll try to make it up to you. Kasuni, I'm right, we have about 50 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, my dear. Okay. Well, can I urge you to be brief? For example, if I go to read all this, We are going to take all the time in the world. So I'm going to put this on the back burner for a while. Right. The question is, if the cost of subsidizing electricity is paid by the treasury and all the government institutions settle their bills promptly, will the CEB still need to borrow substantially from banks to meet their cash flows? Buddhika.
Yeah, on the issue was now there was the PUCSL was accepting.
No. The question is this. Let's give an yes or no and then you can elaborate. The questioner is asking whether the subsidy, we discussed that there is a subsidy that is paid by the treasury. We discussed that there is perhaps a part of the subsidy that you endure that is not reimbursed you. So there is a cost there. Then if that is paid by the treasury, right, then your cash flows are to a certain extent redeemed. Also, the questioner asks, now this question has been asked by a former Secretary General of the Chamber, a very qualified fund manager who is extremely responsible in his questioning. The second question he asks, the part of that is, there are institutions that are getting subsidized electricity, that we know. Iraq, was there a time where the individuals or the households were subsidizing certain industries?
Well, I have to give a long answer.
No. I'm going to ask you then, the question is, if there are institutions that settle their bills on time, now there are lots of organizations that keep not paying for 2 years. Still, would you have to borrow? I think the answer would be that you would have to borrow less even if you're borrowing.
Well, it's like this, sir. I'll just take 1 minute only. The cost of electricity supply consists of the fixed cost and the variable cost, and the cost related to settling short-term debts.
Right.
The fixed cost includes the project-related costs.
Yes.
So therefore, if you have borrowed for investment,
Yeah.
that will be reflected in the depreciation and interest costs
Right.
allowed in the fixed costs.
Right.
So if all these cost elements are covered through earnings from selling this electricity to customers, you don't need any government subsidy.
Right.
But if the government says, look, elections are coming in, so
Right.
why not subsidy?
Yeah.
Then you need a government subsidy. Government usually
Chirag, I'm going to interrupt you
promises-
there. The question is very simple. The question is, if the subsidy is reimbursed and if everybody pays on time, I'm sure the answer to that is very simple. There are large organizations that consume a lot of electricity and don't pay on time. So if you improve your debt, right? Now the other day I rented a Walker's Tours car. Within 2 weeks the man wants payment. Okay? So I'm talking about debt correction, which will improve cash flow, which will consequently reduce the working capital debt that you absorb and consequently the interest cost. The next question is, can the panel explain how the cost of production of electricity can be made more competitive by using renewables, improving? I think much of this was discussed, right? And maybe this change in the mix, I think we discussed that adequately. So I'm going to put that by. The next question is basically, thank you very much.
Ranil, can I answer that question?
We don't have time, Lakshita, right? We don't have time because you already answered it extensively about the mix and all that.
He may be expecting a different answer.
Yeah, but
1
I
minute.
want to know your 1 minute. I know it goes much more. Sorry, I have to control this. We'll take that up with time permits. We'll be more than happy to take it up with time permits. I want to give equal voice to people. Now, this is not a question. This comes from the Women's Chamber. It says SOEs as creditors of CEB. Now, I can't ask questions off the floor, but if you like, you can grab another question card and give me a question. I can see the lady nodding. Okay, another question is, I guess this is a question more connected with employees. I think certain acts, when there is a transition, thank you, Kasni, talks about how the employees of that organization can have some comfortable job security. Are new employment letters going to be given and all of that? So Buddhika, this question is more for you. Do you believe from, and I'm not trying to make this disruptive or bringing in unions, but whether you are the private sector or the public sector, let's take the word union out because unfortunately that gets bad names. But the people within the organization do you believe that the draft bill adequately provides for continuity or a VRS for non-continuity or some job security? Because you will have to opt for working in no longer in the CEB, but to a successor company. The question is it clear or not in the act?
Yeah, it's clear to some extent, but we need additional assurance.
You need additional assurance.
Yeah.
So what kind of assurance you are looking for if it is clear?
For example, it says the terms and conditions continue to be there, but you know, our line minister is bashing CB in the media, and the trust in him, on employees' trust in him is eroding.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me pause, ask you to pause there in your interest as well. Basically, I hope that your union will be able to engage the minister and come to some kind of convergence. So we'll try not to comment on the minister, except when Verity Research put out some numbers and said that we are the highest cost in the region, the minister said that is wrong. Tilak?
Once again, how many minutes do you give me? Can I show a slide?
2.
Okay, 2. Get me slide number 5, please.
Slide number 5, please.
Because we have to talk in numbers, no, Ranel,
Sure
right?
thing.
We just
Sure
can't
thing.
say hearsay. So, and different countries have different pricing
I know.
mechanisms. And some countries
Basically, the question is, in fairness to the minister and in fairness to Verity Research has put out a statement which has gone viral. If indeed that is not fair, then I would like to think that the minister, who has immediately responded in print and electronic media, should also be heard. So I would like you to...
I would say both parties are right and both parties are wrong. I will, because it's not a question with a simple answer.
Okay.
All right. So this is I've shown this before as well in other fora, but it doesn't go viral.
Yeah.
All right.
If you can reduce the lights a bit, because these are very good slides.
So
if the lighting
this
in
is
the auditorium can be reduced, please. I don't know how you can do that, provided the videography people don't mind. I would urge you to reduce the lighting.
This is a household customer using 90 units of electricity per month.
Right.
And I've calculated how much he will be paying if you place him in different countries. So
Okay.
simple. So if he's in Tamil Nadu, now don't tell anybody, he doesn't pay anything. Right? Now, of course, I have to be truthful and say it is 0. Right?
Okay.
But I'm not proposing anything like that for Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And Singapore pays more. But
Right.
you see, 90 kilowatt hours is not a huge amount of electricity.
Exactly.
I don't think there is anybody in this audience who could manage with 90 in your house.
Right.
So it's really a rock bottom level of consumption. And see how much he is paying compared with even more developed countries like South Korea.
Right.
Next slide, please. Now this is where we got the Asia Cup for electricity. All right. So our commercial customers, including this building,
Right.
is paying as if you were in Singapore.
Right.
All right.
Fantastic.
So of course your counterparts
Sure.
in Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, India, Tamil Nadu, Nepal, South Korea pay substantially lower tariffs.
Right.
Next slide, please.
And that's the third.
This is
last slide.
manufacturing industry, medium scale.
Yeah.
They are here, and all are, of course, we are not competing with Singapore for investments on manufacturing, but we are competing with Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, India, many states, and Bangladesh as well. Their electricity bills are about 40% lower.
Tilak, your 2 minutes is up and you have done an excellent job.
That's it.
Thank you for the slides. Essentially, the message Tilak is giving is that, yes, our cost of electricity is high. And the sooner the government accepts it and tries to see how you can reduce it. And I say this also because I have my origins in a village. I'm doing some agricultural work there, and I visit the place very regularly. In fact, tomorrow I'll be hopping a train to Beliatta to go there. People in those parts are not waiting for samurdis and for handouts. That is the old-fashioned story. There are lots of people who are willing to work hard, but they also want to go home and enjoy electricity. So when we simply say that can't help, the electricity cost is high, I really think, and I make bold again to say, that I think the government has to get back on the drawing board, right? The next question is that right. If we as a public are paying our stipulated state as stipulated the bank, now this I think looks like from a doctor, like prescriptions, you can't read it. If we as the public are paying our stipulated share or whatever it is of the state's electricity, bank or electricity, why is the CB always in debt?
I think that has been answered. We were never given a cost recovery tariff since 2014. Last time the tariff increase was from 2013. 2014 was a reduction. So we have been never paying our costs.
I think Tilak answered that. Yeah, Tilak answered that. I have a comment from the chamber. Actually, questions are only one question per participant. This person has raised two, does not matter. And the person says that the Ceylon chamber has been engaged in these matters of procurement and all that along. Yes, that may be the case. But I have also been part of the main committee of the Ceylon chamber, and I say boldly to the chairman, Duminda Hulangamua, that the chamber must raise its voice louder. And it must encourage its membership in the private sector to be a little more responsible, not to seek from only the private participation in the best possible manner. And I say this because I am also from the private sector. I want to see a responsible political community, and I want to see a responsible corporate community. Any comment on that, Tilak, Bundika and Lakshita?
Quickly, on the draft bill, I was in the committee of Institution of Engineers, who also made a very significant bundle of comments on the draft bill.
Yeah.
So Institution of Engineers has been, very closely following. It's not only one action. There have been many actions throughout the last 2 years in trying to engage with the government in the process of providing comments, ideas, suggestions, offering meetings, but not getting much of a hearing as well,
right,
on the principles on which the bill should be drafted. So when I go to these fora, what I mostly see, Ranil, is that the customer is not represented. Although there are 7 million customers and perhaps some electricity users associations who are very vociferous on the street.
Right.
But when it comes to serious meetings,
right,
the customer is not represented. And I think the Institution of Engineers is trying to do that. But I would like all the trade chambers to speak on behalf of customers and not only about their members who are investors.
Excellent point, Tilak. I endorse what you say and endorse it fully. We would like to see a chamber community, and I've been part of the chambers. I've done work for gratis work for the Federation of Chambers, the National Chamber, and all of that, and the Ceylon Chamber. And I make bold to say that why even the Thought Leadership Forum I began is because I didn't see a strong independent voice. The chamber community, I say with responsibility, comprises of members of the chamber who might sometimes downplay what is in the national interest, and I know they are not going to like this statement, and showcase right up above what is important for the chamber members. For example, the Consumer Affairs Authority Act, Kingsley Wickramaratne Minister, late Kingsley Wickramaratne, tried very hard in the run-up to the year 2000 to bring the first ever consumer protection law into this country. Having studied the consumer protection in a market economy like the United States, I came back to this country and at various fora, I raised this question. However, this was not really taken up properly. Then the government changed in 2001 December, and in 2002, Minister Ravi Karunayaka somehow brought the Act, the Consumer Affairs Authority Act, into place. I had studied the bill because he had asked me to serve on the authority. I had declined. Then once the act was passed in Parliament, he called me again and said, "You're refusing everything. Can you please serve on the council?" Now, the Consumer Affairs Authority is an authority of 10 people. Above that, there is a Consumer Affairs Council to which you can appeal. So I finally consented to being on the Consumer Affairs Council. But when I read the act, I found that this clause connected with preventing the occurrence of monopolies is out. So I looked at it, read my file copy, and asked him what happened to that. And here was his answer. Either through a recording or somebody linking up, I don't mind this going public. Here's what he told me. Ranel, I was overseas when a group of people representing a particular chamber went and met the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister withdrew that clause. I'm saying this with responsibility. I then accepted this on condition that he said, "You draft that provision back again, Ranel, I'll get it through Parliament." It never happened because that government was swept out of office. But I worked as a member of the Consumer Affairs Council only to look at abuse of monopoly power. Now, I think there are members in the audience here who are even part of Big Four professional services firms. I can say with responsibility, when Pricewaterhouse merged with Coopers and Lybrand, it took several years for the European Mergers and Commission to agree, because they had to make sure that there will not be monopolization in Europe by one of the Big Four firms. But in Sri Lanka, that clause is out. So I'm coming connected with that to say the act, to my mind, is inadequate in relation to whether I give 2 distributorship licenses to one party and where there is a dominance of a licensee in a competitive electricity market where you're not necessarily going to have a national uniform national tariff. So moving on to some more questions of the floor, I'll connect up a question that I have here. With an important question. Now, many people say LECO is a great example. a distribution company, right? And if LECO can do as well as they're doing, why can't the CEB do as well? Isn't that the perception you had? Now, interestingly enough, the Electricity Reform Act of 2002 brought LECO, excuse me, I think you're going up and down and up and down. Can I urge you all, can you please take a seat? Can you urge you all to raise your hands and someone will collect the cards and then rather than coming one by one, you bring me at least 5 by 5. We have time. LECO and the CEB were to come together and unbundling to take place. But the current act ignores LECO. LECO is kept as is. Only the balance is getting unbundled. Any reason for that, Lakshita?
Can you help me on that? I don't.
Okay, Tilak or Buddhika?
Actually, originally in 2002, LECO was part of the equation.
I know, that's what I said. I'm saying now it is not. Why?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Can I ask you, Buddhika, because I know you have those numbers, there is a perception that CEB is inefficient, LECO is very efficient. Can you show me some statistics? What slide is that, please?
That's slide number 4, I think. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would urge you to take a very close look at this slide. Even I have been under the impression that LECO is a fantastic performer and the CEB is not.
Now, LECO is a very small area.
Buddhika, can I help you in a little way, if I may? This chart, ladies and gentlemen, on the extreme right, near my fingers here, is the LECO numbers. There are 5 distribution companies currently. DL 1, 2, 3, 4. DL 5 is LECO. Buddhika, over to you.
Actually, there's 5 distribution licenses. CB has 4 distribution licenses. And when it comes to area, LECO is 375 square kilometers. You can see in the second row, for example, distribution division 4, CEB has 6,870 square kilometers. Now, if you go to total number of employees, for example, distribution division 4 has 2,969 employees. LECO has 1,448.
Let me pause you there for a minute. Basically, what you're saying, Buddhika, DL5 in the last column, LECO has land area square kilometers of 375.
Yes.
Whereas DL4, my goodness, that has 6,870.
Yeah.
So in terms of land area, it has, what is that? Huh? About more than 20 times. Okay, 20 times. But the employees in LECO is 1.5 million and the employee in this is 1.8 million. So you see, per employee, they are doing far superior to LECO.
Yeah, of course. Now, customers per employee, LECO has more customers per employee. If you compare 2 distribution licenses, others are comparable.
Right. We may not have time to go through the whole thing.
No,
but
just
essentially
one
the
thing.
main
Just
points.
one thing, because the general perception is CB personal cost is higher. Let me check. Now, per employee cost per month, if you compare, LECO is double the CB.
Right. Let me pause there. LECO has independence. And I have a lot of friends of mine who keep saying LECO is a star. The rest of the CEB can also be made to be a star. But these statistics reveal that LECO has more freedom to pay more, and if you compare with CEB, you can say LECO is overstaffed then. Okay, can we, have you got, if in about 1 minute, can you tell me anything more? Otherwise, we'll move on.
I wouldn't say LECO is overstaffed. I would say CB is also efficient.
Right. So in other words, you can say in this comparison, then CEB is not necessarily overstaffed, you can say, right?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So this is a very revealing take. Now, my question is this: is LECO very profitable?
I think Tilak can answer.
Tilak.
LECO is profitable because the accounts are separated.
The question is LECO profitable? Yes or no? Yes.
Profitable. Profitable,
Right.
yes.
How profitable?
Well, that happens as follows. LECO's accounts are completely separated out, whereas CEB4 distributors, their accounts are clubbed together with transmission and CEB's own generation, which of course requires payments to the private generators
Right.
and for your rooftop as well.
Right.
So if the end-use customer price is
Right.
not matching with all these costs,
Right.
finally CEB as a whole
Right.
is reported to be loss-making. So
Excellent point.
by definition, CEB distributors one by one, 1, 2, 3, 4, and CEB transmission and CEB generation are also by definition profitable.
If you do the unbundling.
If you do the unbundling and have the price, customer price matching with the approved cost.
So, which means we are looking at the pluses of reform. This reinforces the point that unbundling is a necessary progressive step.
I would say at least under the existing Act 2,
Right.
CEB could have internally unbundled and published accounts for the 4 distributors exactly the same way LECO published the accounts.
Right.
And they will be profitable. I have no doubt
Exactly.
about it because they are defined to
This
be
is
profitable.
this is a very interesting question of allocation of infrastructure and costs and so on. So, if you do that, then you will probably be showing a very profitable DL 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'll be ripe for privatization. Going back to my valuation of assets and conversions, then right. I'm afraid, like I said before, former GM of the CEB has written a very long one. If you like to, you can ask for another blank question card and make it a one line. Oh, thank you. A quick answer for this, Tilak. How can we balance out the geopolitical interests of other countries which influence the government on our investment portfolio? Good question.
Good question, needs a long answer, but I would say we will ask our geopolitical influencers
Yes.
also come into the fold and participate in competitive bidding.
Right? Good point.
There are many examples. The 3 islands of Jaffna
Yeah.
went through competitive bidding for microgrids, renewable energy microgrids.
Right.
Sadly, the contract went to the not so favored, the other countries, right? So therefore that could not be implemented.
Sure.
And the islands are still being supplied with diesel power. Just
Sure.
one example.
Tilak, when Buddhika put up that slide about procurement, Buddhika, you said 4 methods, and in one method, I'm not too sure whether I saw it here or in some other reading of mine, when there is a government to government involvement, preference is given. I don't see any reason why.
Under the existing act, you see, the act was amended to include this government to government business
G2G.
not requiring competitive bidding, and this came in the 2013 amendment to the act. So of course the drafters of the acts are very careful about their wording to make it as vague as possible so that the cabinet can make a decision. So even the subsequent amendments have these vague statements which can be interpreted in any way you like. Right now, if you could interpret the Electricity Act as it stands now to say that no renewable energy projects requires any competitive bidding. You can interpret it that way.
I think this question was answered fully by you, Lakshita and Tilak. The general perception of the public is that renewable energy, especially of solar, will reduce the tariff cost. It appears from the discussion it is not so. If so, why do not the CEB engineers educate the public on the issue? That is what we're doing, right? And maybe as the request makes, maybe you can go further. I think there is a lot of pro-renewable articles in the Daily FT. Maybe you guys can, if you want to educate the public, as the questioner says, engage Nista Kasim, I'll make the arrangements for you. You start writing your columns, renewable or not. Solar Industries Association, how would the CB look at giving an attractive feed-in tariff for small-scale plants to increase renewable, looking at high avoided costs of thermal plants? Lakshita.
Once again, I gave you some figures. Even as at now, there are 5 thermal power plants in the country which can generate a unit of electricity as less than the price of solar. So it's, once again, having said that, I will confuse your audience. Ranil, allow me to confuse them.
Okay.
Your electricity solar tariff is 37. The thermal prices of these power plants, 5 power plants, are less than that. But even under given circumstances, a unit generated from solar, replacing a thermal unit that is cheaper than that, can actually bring down the total cost. That is why I said it is all about achieving the correct generation mix. It is not about going more from the renewables or less from thermal. It is about getting the correct renewable mix. I don't have enough time to give you a lesson on power system planning and economics, but if I have time, I will give you later, but take it from me. It is about the mix, not about a particular technology.
Right. Lakshita, while you're on that, with regard to licensing, the Act provides for participation of the outside. How does the Act provide for developing criteria to see who is eligible to obtain a generation or transmission license?
The present Act 2009 version had some qualifications, but it has been taken off in the 2022 amendment, I think, to get a generation license. Transmission license, of course, only CEB can hold a transmission license. And to hold a distribution license, there are certain qualifications, like you have to be a government entity in the present Act.
Okay.
But in the new draft bill, I don't know, the Buddhika can help me. What is the
I think the new draft bill, the generation licenses has no any barriers. Anybody can generate.
Sure.
The transmission licensee, the system network operator.
Yeah.
Only condition is the government has more than 50%.
That is the 2009 Act.
No, the
Current
new
draft
Act
bill,
also.
is it? Okay.
Government has more than.
So
50%.
this is what any legal person who has been issued with a letter of award by the NSO, National Systems Operator, for constructing a transmission line in accordance with paragraph D of subsequent order shall apply to the regulator for an additional transmission license.
Additional transmission license is something else. Now, additional transmission license is an investor can develop a transmission line, and it doesn't have to transfer CEB or the network service operator.
Good point.
Yeah.
Tilak, you want to comment on that? Let's say someone in the Uttram district wants to have something.
Say Mullaitivu
Mullaitivu.
has a big solar park,
Right.
and a big company comes and twists the arm of the government.
G to G.
Yes, G to G, or we are very big,
Right.
and uses the loophole in the Act and gets a negotiated agreement which includes the transmission line.
Right.
And the transmission line comes and connect to Abarana, let us say,
Right.
which is the node of,
Right.
in that area.
Right.
So now this company under the new Act can get a transmission license. So thereafter, anybody using that transmission line would have to pay this company. Of course, above all, this company has to agree the other party to use, and that party could be CEB itself, or could be other private investors, or at times CEB may want to send power in the reverse direction to the people in Mullaitivu. So we foresee certain constraints coming in when you have this kind of a provision for a network which is not as extensive as in India, because in India there are such transmission lines. So I would say caution. Perhaps we can bring in this kind of provisions later as we go into the reform process, but not right at the outset.
Okay,
Thank you.
I understand. Then, a question connected with, I think, the Act again, but the current bill provides for a time period, and correct me if I'm wrong, where the existing IPPs and PPAs kind of terminate. What is the situation about that?
No, it's not termination, but there's a clause to say that all has to be renegotiated.
Renegotiated.
Buddhika can add on that.
What happens is after enactment of the act,
Yeah,
within 9 months,
yeah,
all the PPAs and SPPAs
yeah.
has
To be renegotiated.
had to be renegotiated, signed with the NSO.
Yeah. But you know, if it is just a changing of the parties, I can understand. But what if I read it also? It said, I think, renegotiated or something.
It doesn't
Now
say
that is where,
it doesn't say renegotiations.
what does it say?
It simply says we have to re-sign the agreement with the NSO.
No, re-signing is fine, but maybe I'm wrong then.
yeah,
Because if I have done, now I'm now putting myself in the shoes of a IPP, you know, rightly or wrongly, let's say they have got a 20-year deal. Okay? Now, if you say that they have to sign again and that requires a revisitation, that whole projection that they had that made them eligible, the capital cost they have incurred and all that becomes a question, no?
Yeah.
So can we assume then it's perhaps an administrative thing?
Let's hope so. I have to make a correction. It doesn't say negotiated, but Buddhika is right.
No, he's
But-
right. It
And
says-
also it doesn't say under not less favorable terms for the tariff consumers. So that part is also not there. We don't know whether it is merely an administrative process, in which case we don't have to put it into an act.
Yeah, but you know, something very interesting is when I was chairman of the Monitoring and Advisory Committee, at a meeting where Mr. Karujasuri was minister, he told me, Ranel, there is something outside your area that I need to talk to you about. When I asked him what, he said there was a massive lobby from IPPs to increase the tariff. I studied it. He had another meeting and I told him simply to say no. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was not my role to say yes or no. But what I'm trying to say here is that at the same time, there are instances where I think it would be only fair, give and take between the IPP and the government, where certain costs have dropped substantially. Let's take solar, right? I'm not talking about installation of panels. I'm just giving a hypothetical example that the probability is quite high that this is a utility, it's not something else. You have signed up for 20 years and you're going to have money for jam, that's not right. So the point I'm trying to take is, if there is complete renegotiation, you can have power play. But if there is reasonable justification for revisitation of the terms, that's just an equitable, I would like to think, from a consumer protection standpoint. A few other things. One of the concerns, key concerns about the current bill is that timelines given are too tight. Any comment on that, all three of you?
Yeah, I think we have commented on this to the ministry as well.
Uh-huh.
How the timelines are very strict, very aggressive actually.
Right.
So we wonder whether it's realistic, and it's kind of
Yeah.
worry actually.
It's a worry because whether it's possible, right? And it's a legislative, statutorily dictated, mandated timeline. It's probably not going to work, I think. And that might take away from the whole reform process. There's a question here which I'm not presenting to you. A very simple general question. Does the electricity sector CB have to be reformed? I'm not even putting that question to you. Because this whole thrust, whoever answered that question, is facilitating desirable electric sector reforms. It is taken as a given that reform is a desirable next step. What we are discussing here is the hows, the whys, the wherefores, isn't it? So with your permission or without your permission, I'm laying that by. Engineer Lakshita was right. My question on cost was because wind and solar is free. I didn't know wind and solar is free. I don't think hydro is free either. Why can't we make our energy more competitive by using more renewables? I think we discussed that. The energy mix and all. Does the panel believe that the proposal to bring down the electricity cost, as Dr. Sembalapiti explained, will it bring down the cost? Now, I think Dr. Pradeep Perra, who is the manager of the reforms, just like Secretary to my committee, Nihal Vikram Surya, whose name I must mention with respect and affection, he was manager of our sector reforms in 2002 and was secretary to my committee. One of the key slides that Dr. Pradeep Perra presented at the Colombo Club 2 weeks ago, he starts by saying reform will lead to a reduction in cost. So that's the same question. Dr. Sembalapiti.
Do we know what the price of electricity is in Sri Lanka? I mean, we are talking so much about the price.
Yeah.
What is the national average price?
Yeah. Tell us.
All right, we should know.
Right.
The answer is 48.
That's right.
Right now.
Yeah.
So this consists of certain fixed costs and variable costs.
Sure.
So, and we heard from here, and I tend to agree that the fixed costs are in the correct range.
Right.
Even if you compare it with India, Bangladesh, oh yes, the slide is coming. So the fixed costs are in the correct range. They add up to about 11. In fact, I think CEB has understated the distribution costs last time for whatever reason. And there's a lot of debate out there as to why that cost has gone up. But this green one is in the correct range. Remember this 5 rupees,
Yes.
out of which 4
Yeah.
is to pay our
Finance costs.
working capital debt. So
Right.
gradually this number should actually come
down.
if we faithfully settle these short-term debts over the next
And also with
5,
the high
6,
tariff, a good
5,
part will come
6
down.
years,
So
right?
what Tilak is trying to say here is if you take the columns,
Yeah.
right? Column 1 is variable, 2 fixed capacity, 3 fixed, and the other one your total. In the total, there is a 5. Of the 5, corporate cost is 1, finance cost is 4. 4 out of 5 is 80%.
That's right. So now the killer is this 32.
Yeah,
It's the generation variable cost, which
Yeah.
is a combination of several numbers.
that's right.
CB hydro, 0. CB wind, 0. No, it doesn't come at 0.
Yeah.
CB wind, previous slide please. CB wind maintenance cost is embedded here. Maintenance and debt repayment is embedded here.
Yeah,
All right, so it's not free. CB hydro, maintenance and depreciation, all that is embedded here.
that's fixed cost of generation,
That's right.
transmission, and
So
distribution.
the
Yeah.
variable comes to 32, and
Right.
that's the killer.
Yeah.
If you ask me, in India, it is the equivalent of 17 Sri Lanka rupees.
Right.
And if we get our act together,
Right,
because of course, 10 years ago we said this is happening,
right,
but nobody listened,
right.
and it happened. So now we say how it can be brought back to international standards. So if we work hard, do the correct thing, competition, proper competition,
Yeah.
we can bring this 32, not
Yeah.
as so low as 17, but my target is 20.
20
rupees, we can
Right.
bring it down if we do the correct thing.
That's very encouraging, Tilak. So essentially what Tilak says here, today it is 48. And he just explained to us, 48 is a function of 32, 11 and 5. 11 and 5, 11 he regards as reasonable. 5, he says the probability will drop because 4 out of the 5, 80% is finance cost. And we hope there is a debt equity restructuring and also accumulated debt write-off because we are squeezing the consumer and charging a huge price. Right? Okay.
So,
So-
one last point. So my target is that 48 should be finally brought down to 32. The
32.
summation 32.
Yeah.
But don't forget, if the private sector comes in, these numbers have to go up.
Right. The
Return on
possibility.
investment. Return on investment.
Now I must share with you a fellow chartered accountant that many chartered accountants here know, lives in Auckland, New Zealand. He had happened to see on LinkedIn this particular session I had posted. He sent me a note which I think I shared with all of you. This guy, who is my batchmate, who says that when he went to Auckland, he joined the electricity provider. They visited various parts of New Zealand. They went by car and they stayed in motels. After privatization, he was still there in that organization. He came to Sri Lanka and went back and rejoined the same sector but private company. He said we travel by plane as opposed to by car, and we stayed in 5-star hotels. And he also believes that while New Zealand has done quite a good job, that the government does not want to reduce the tariffs because the government has a stake in some of them and gets dividends. So that's an interesting aside. Moving on, we did a comparison of LECO and all of that. A quick question for you is this question of, I have only 2 more questions from the audience. Have you got anything more? Thank you. When I said don't walk up and down for one, I didn't expect you to sit and wait completely. There is a lot of discussion about LNG, and I'm going to pose that question to Tilak. Tilak, in your view, is there a role for LNG? And if so, what kind of role? Because the government itself is attempting to negotiate G2Gs on that, I think.
We need a transition fuel.
Transition fuel.
Transition fuel, because ultimately in the very long term, in the future, we may be 100% renewable.
Yeah.
But it will take quite a long time for us to get there, and we cannot bridge the gap with diesel or fuel oil. All right. So
Okay.
that's appears to be what we are trying to do by taking various shortcuts or excuses not to have a LNG terminal in the country.
Right.
But of course, we know Korean proposal 2015, India, Japan proposal 2017, competitive bidding process 2019, New Fortress 2020, Midnight Agreement.
New Fortress,
you remember?
anyone remembers
All
that?
right.
Yeah.
So, but exactly 10 years after Sri Lanka formally decided to have a LNG terminal,
right.
we have nothing even in the distant future coming our way.
Right.
But Bangladesh also decided around the same time,
Right.
come 2019, they have 2 terminals,
have?
importing gas,
Really?
and Bangladesh's electricity price is half the price of Sri Lanka.
That's interesting because Bangladesh, I think, attempted their reforms after 2002, right?
Yeah, but this is actually not really coupled to reforms. It's really policy and perseverance and implementation of projects.
So that is basically your raw material procurement.
Yes, it's a procurement problem. It's,
Right.
it's nothing.
Definitely.
A G2G also will not work.
Yeah.
Then finally, of course, before I close,
Yeah.
our manufacturing industry is looking for a cheaper source of thermal energy, be it ceramic, tile,
Sure.
tire industry, rubber-based industries. They need a cheaper source of thermal
Definitely.
energy.
Yeah.
And all other countries in the region are using regasified LNG for that.
Right.
Our ceramic industry, sadly, porcelain industry is using LPG
Right.
for their heating, which is a very expensive
I
source.
invited the ceramic industry people. So essentially what you're saying is there is a role for LNG.
There is definitely a
Right.
role.
So what we need perhaps is a stronger policy analysis and some decisions, some resolutions.
No, policy analysis is there. It's a procurement problem.
Okay.
Your friend versus my friend, who will do the terminal?
Okay.
Finally,
Right.
both friends will run away,
Yeah.
and there will be a new friend next year.
Right.
And Sri Lanka is still waiting for
Right.
the terminal.
So they are also, okay, that's good. Now, what we haven't discussed is how the new bill or the gazetted bill of December, right? Or September, right? Last year, which is still not gone to Parliament. So this discussion, we are actually timing it right. Whoever wants to benefit from this discussion, whoever wants to connect with us, the Thought Leadership Forum, and engage with the government in order to seek and obtain some kind of amendments so that before it goes to Parliament, at least committee stage amendments are there. I don't think, although it was gazetted, the original gazetted one is unlikely to go on the order paper because then they have not taken any. So the probability is an amended version will go to Parliament, and hopefully, unlike the online safety bill, after the speaker signs, they are revisiting it again. Let's hope that this happens before.
Electricity bill did not even go that far.
Right.
It was made available.
But I thought it was gazetted.
No, it was gazetted.
Yeah.
It was gazetted, made available, and it was very badly spoken of by the opposition.
Right.
Starting from spelling mistakes to translation
Right.
errors, etc. So it was quickly withdrawn.
Good, thanks. So basically, what I am trying to say is that the probability is it's not going to come back in the same form it was gazetted, but it undoubtedly will come back with legal draftsman's amendments, and then it will be ready for Parliament. So this discussion, like I said, is not too late. Right. This is a question which is outside reform. As a CA Sri Lanka Government Audit Office, do your people have the regional capabilities or technical expertise to audit CEB or LECO? The answer is yes. I have done audits of the equivalent of CEBs in other parts of the world. All the big four firms I know, my firm Deloitte, as far back, there's a Deloitte country partner, he was here a few minutes ago. But Deloitte, even if I go back to the 80s, had what they call the Deloitte Public Utilities Division in Washington. And every region around the world has. So the answer, if this is a question from media, I will boldly say that the professional services providers in this country are clearly equipped not only to audit CEBs or its successors, but also to engage in restructuring and reform and consulting. I'm not lobbying for consulting here. I'm just saying there are many big four firms here. Some have retired and they're still here. Some are fully engaged with their mobile phones. And I think Kasuni said, switch off the mobile phone. Kasuni, I'm sorry. I will name them at the tail end. Good. How will foreign partners involved in the energy sector affect national security interests? We discussed that. To what extent does the current bill provide for vulnerabilities with regard to national security? Good question. It's not quite clear. Shall we settle for that? Good. Why does CEB and LECO have different policies when installing solar and renewable energy? Is there a different policy? No. Of the energy cost of 32 at present, what is the cheapest and most expensive source? I think hydro.
Can I get the next slide, please? Is it too late?
No.
Can
We have only
get the
one more
slide?
question. You can take time.
Yeah.
Can we have
All
that
right.
slide, please,
Oh, yeah,
for
it's
Mr.
on. It's
Dr.
on.
Sepalapiti? Oh,
So large hydro comes at 0, and large wind, remember I told you that the maintenance cost of this and the depreciation, etc. are embedded in the fixed costs. So on the left hand side, the blue bar is the mature renewables who signed up since 1996. And the new renewables are being signed up for 37 rupees or more and rooftops, the fleet that was signed up before, up to this year, fetches an average of 25, and new rooftops are being signed at 37 or more. Coal, as CB submitted, the figure was 29. When I checked the recent coal prices, a unit of electricity from coal can be produced at 18 rupees. And the rest, of course, the oil, we know it's very expensive. And LNG, on which we are waiting for the last 10 years, could have produced at 30 rupees. So if we have to bring 32 down, I don't have to, be a mathematician to say that let's produce anything and everything below 32, and most likely we will get there to bring the prices down. So, but as we know, only the red ones are being signed. So therefore, electricity price will not go down. It will not go down.
Tilak, can I ask you to comment on your box here?
Yes. Yes.
Rooftop agreements, that
Rooftop agreements are going at 37, or there's a variable tariff which is at 48,
Right.
not being adjusted downwards, irrespective of softening interest rates going down.
Right.
CB, Ministry, LECO, everybody is silent.
Right.
So therefore, this gap is to be filled by customers.
Adani?
In the media, it says Adani is going to be signed at 32 rupees, payable in dollars. So therefore, rupee depreciating in the future, we will be in trouble. So for the first
But
time,
Adani in India, in terms of dollars and cents, much less.
yes, what we hear in the media is about 5 US cents. So which is about half of that. Previous slide, please. It has
Previous
skipped.
slide, please. Control tower is.
There is a power plant mentioned in the media, which apparently is negotiating with the government.
Which company is that?
It says United Solar from Australia.
Right, 50 rupees.
50 rupees. So therefore, these things will not bring, although they are renewable.
So that must be
we all
something
like
like
it.
Smoky Mountain then.
Could very well be. We do not know about these companies.
Sure.
So
Since we are running out of time, thank you very, very much. The last question I had, no further questions will be entertained because we have to close, is I think the gentleman is not here, but he has asked a question at left. Should reforms begin making first 60 units for user less than that limit available, free to the poor and vulnerable? Should reforms assure sustainability and environmental damage minimization? Second question, of course, is something that everybody expects should happen, and that is where the decision will have to be. But the first one, should reforms begin making first 60 units for user less than that limit available, free to the poor?
To do that, we don't need to do institutional reforms. We only need to do tariff reforms.
Absolutely, like your LNG procurement. Yeah. So that becomes also a political issue.
There are different types of reforms. You can do legislative reforms, you can do business model reforms. This is something very simple. If the government wishes that they want to do this, they can enforce this through policy. By giving the CEB a subsidy,
Giving the CB
subsidy, and we need not do any institutional reforms
Maybe
to
the
achieve
ADB and
that.
the World Bank can foot that bill. Right, that's possible. Then, on my part, I don't have any further questions except that one last one, because actually that will exhaust 100% the questions I and the panel had in mind, and I'm very happy that we've reached that stage. If I can seek your indulgence for another 1 minute, there's a lot of reference to the uniform national tariff, Buddhika. And I would like every one of you, starting with Buddhika, then Tilak, and then Lakshita, to comment on anything and everything that you might like to comment on as briefly as possible on the uniform national tariff in a country, in a Sri Lankan context.
Yeah, now if the government wish to continue,
Speak up louder, please.
if the government continue the same price for everybody, there will, once the unbundling happens, the government has to tackle that with giving different allowed revenues to different distribution companies. Now that is a kind of issue that will not encourage. Then comes the problem. Then how the distribution companies encourage the competition or efficiency. If we go for unbundling, then the unified national tariff will be in trouble, I guess.
Tilak?
Now, uniform national tariff means if you are an industry, whether you are in GOL or Jaffna, you pay at the same tariff.
Absolutely.
It's not that all customers pay the same price.
Right.
So Jaffna will be supplied by company A and GOL may be supplied by company D.
Mhm.
So, and these companies are different. As we saw earlier, the 4 CB distributors are different to each other and they are all different to LECO as well. So if they purchase electricity from the grid at the same price,
Right.
if their customer mix is different, their line lengths are different, so they cannot sell electricity at the same price to the final customer. So of course this is a policy decision whether Sri Lanka can have 5 different tariff tables or 1 tariff table.
Right.
So over the last several years after 2009 Act,
Right.
it has been decided, it's not written into the Act, but an administrative decision
Right.
that it will be a uniform national tariff.
Right.
So there is a reconciliation process to match that. So in my view, Sri Lanka is not that large, and there were different tariffs when the municipalities were doing distribution in the 1960s and 70s.
Right.
Different municipalities had different prices, and it gave rise to a lot of unpleasant situation because Sri Lankans talk to each other over the telephone in the night and discuss their electricity price.
Right.
So there'll be another point for them to discuss.
Right.
Look, you are paying more and I'm paying
Right.
less. There must be some fraud here and all that. So anyway, my preference is to continue with the uniform national tariff,
Yeah.
and the calculations to make the adjustments are not that difficult.
Right. Lakshita?
My view is something different. I prefer to do away with the uniform national tariff and let the 5 distribution licenses have 5 different tariffs so that we can have benchmark competition. The licenses who have higher fixed costs, their customers who are served by them will automatically have a higher fixed cost. So my personal view, personally, I'd like to do away with the uniform national tariff. It will make the tariff filing process much more simpler. Let the licenses have 5 tariffs so that we can find out who are the best performing licenses.
That's easier said than done, Lakshita. My quick comment on that.
That is the easiest thing to done than having a UNT, uniform national tariff.
Sure. My view is that the geographies and the structures and the variety of other factors will determine what might be the cost and the margins you want. And I'm not too sure whether within this small geography that is feasible, but I respect your opinion and I have my concern. We'll close on that question. We'll close that. And finally, we have exhausted questions off the floor. Any final comment that Tilak would like to say? Buddhika and then Lakshita.
Reform, with or without reforms, I like competitive procurement of generation and benchmarking costs of CB, even if this act does not go through.
Right.
Benchmarking CB and LECO performance and KPIs provided and compared with regional best or the wider region, so that we can provide better service to the customers at the lower cost. And my target is 32 rupees per kilowatt hour, which is exactly 10 US cents. Internationally, if you tell anybody that Sri Lanka's average price is 10 US cents, they will say, all right, okay, that's fine. In India, it's 8, but that's fine. But today we have to tell them, sadly, it is 15 US cents a kilowatt hour. And they will say, my God.
I know.
And I don't want that.
So which means in order to sustain your scenario, you'll have to have an aware, fair, up-to-date regulator. Regulator.
Yes, of course. The regulator should be the first to be worried.
Right.
Not me. Yeah. that we are charging 48 rupees.
So the lesson is that we cannot trifle with the regulator, politically or otherwise.
We need a really, really more independent
Good.
and aggressive regulator.
Good. That's something that I am very particular about. Buddhika?
Yeah, as CB Engineers Union, I heard clearly say this. CB Engineers Union is not against any reforms. We are ready to unbundle and corporatization, and but the reforms shall be progressive. There are several aspects that need to be revised, amended in the new act, and we are looking forward to that.
Thank you. So I would like to restate that what Buddhika says, that the engineering union is not against reform. They like to see unbundling happen, which is a very good statement to go public on, because the perception is that always the unions are against. So I must say and place on record that over the last year or more, I believe I have been privileged because I am an advocate of reform, but I call it desirable reform. And I believe I was privileged to get to know you guys, know all of you, both your women and women. And I want to say that we should go public on the fact that the union is for reform, but desirable reform. And you have therefore an expectation to buy into the reform, to seek and obtain the changes that I think makes sense for the government to get on the drawing board back again. Lakshita.
Reforms or otherwise, I like CEB to have one change. With all these, Buddhika showed several performances on the technical side. They are very good, but still the public perception on CEB is very poor. That is because I like very much the CEB to improve its customer-focused service culture. Our performance at the customer interface is very poor. There are a lot of improvements with or without reforms. Our technical performance is very good, but at the customer interface, the CEB doesn't have a customer-focused service culture. I very much like that to be improved with or without reforms.
Thank you very much, but I can only say one thing. That ball is in your court. Good. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for giving us a little more time than the closing time. I want to place on record very sincere, deep appreciation to Tilak, Buddhika and Lakshita. And I also want to place on record, and I repeat the words, that I consider it a privilege to get to know the inside of the CEB just as much as some of you in the audience know. 8 years ago, I had the privilege of getting to know the inside of the Bank of Ceylon. So, and I have deep respect and affection for the public enterprise. So much so that I like to see the CEB taking on from what you say to see whether you can turn the searchlight inwards and to proceed to make those changes like you brought down the systems losses, whether reform takes 1 year or another 5 or 5 months. With that, can I hand over to Kasinui? Sorry, Kasinui, to keep you waiting more than you should have.
What an absolutely enriching dialogue that was. Thank you very much to our panelists and our discussion catalyst for your brilliant insights. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as our event draws to a close, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for your active participation and, of course, your insightful contributions. So today's dialogue has been nothing short of inspiring, illuminating, and of course, thought-provoking. And with that, we wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much.